Two very different historic events are unfolding right now. In the US, people are celebrating 250 years of independence, while thousands of miles away, Iran is putting on its biggest ever state funeral, a grand political and religious spectacle designed to send a message to Washington. Huge crowds are saying farewell to former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei 4 months after he was killed by US and Israeli bombs. As many as 20 million mourners are taking part in a week of ceremonies in 5 cities across Iran and its neighbour and former enemy Iraq. Khamenei will be buried next week. This is happening as the US and Iran observe a fragile ceasefire after signing a preliminary deal to end their conflict. So what do these ceremonies tell us about how Iran wants to position itself after the conflict? And I'm joined by someone who can help answer that. Miad Maleki is Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and previously worked as a Senior Sanctions Official at the US Treasury Department. Welcome to you, Miad. Let me ask you first about the timing of this funeral. It does overlap with the 250th American Independence Day. Why has Iran chosen to do that?
Thanks for having me. I think the timing is very interesting, and it could be perceived as a sign of confidence, but I would view this as a sign of compensation, not really confidence. And I explain that. The Islamic Republic knows that it has lost broad domestic legitimacy. January nationwide protests and the crackdown. They killed over somewhere between 20 to 30,000 protesters, Iranians. That made it undeniable, and it now governs mainly through fear and fatigue rather than consent. So at the same time, it still clinges to a radicalized core base, what I would say about 10 to 15% of the population, who were promised regional victories, nuclear deterrence, and a national recognition of the revolution, the Islamic Revolution. Instead, that base is watching a decapitated leadership, a nuclear program that is ruined, and a missile force that is degraded, and a series of proxy groups that really fail to prevent foreign strikes on Iran itself. So the regime is using Khamenei's burial as as kind of a window dressing to reassure this shrinking core that the project of Islamic revolution is still alive, while they're trying to really stage images of mass unity to blunt its legitimacy crisis at home and also its isolation abroad. In that sense, I think the ceremony is less about honoring Khamenei as a leader and is really more about patching up these 3 exposed vulnerabilities that are laid out: the loss of domestic legitimacy, this mistrust and lack of confidence within its own hardline supporters, and the reality of unprecedented international isolation. So I think they're inviting all these nations, and you saw that there are lower level government officials that have attended from some of these nations, and they're really trying to signal this as a sign of confidence.
Let's hone in on that a little bit more. That's really interesting. To what extent is the funeral about honouring Khamenei and also what you've described as a decapitated leadership showing resilience and defiance after this conflict, basically saying, we survived this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what the regime is doing here is something very deliberate. I think it's weaponizing the Islamic Shiite mourning culture to repackage this defeat as a spiritual martyrdom, I would say. The regime has been overlaying Khamenei's death imagery with Shia Islam, the Shiite Imam Hussein's martyrdom since February. They're really trying to convert this military and strategic loss into a religious victory narrative. But here's the problem with that. The problem with that framing is that the Iranian people saw Khamenei order the killing of thousands of protesters in January, and that was just weeks before Khamenei himself was killed. So the moral architecture of martyrdom does not really hold when the martyr was simultaneously a butcher of his own people. So they can't really sell that as much as they think they can. And I think that that's, again, as I said, it's a sign of the failure they're facing domestically. And again, it's not really about honoring Khamenei at this point. It's really about how they can signal this, as you said, as a sign of victory. They survived this military campaign and continuity. That they have Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas, the proxy groups, attending this funeral service. So they're also signaling that as a continuation of the Islamic Revolution spreading around the region.
So, given all that, who is the funeral really for?
I think, as I mentioned, I think the funeral is really targeting three. I would say the first audience here is the domestic audiences in Iran, um, specifically their core supporters, folks in Iran who were oversold this Islamic revolution, and they were overpromised victory in the region and beyond. And now, what they're seeing is layers and layers of regime officials since Islamic Revolution. They've been removed through this round of wars and strikes. They see a nuclear program that costs this regime hundreds of billions of dollars that is ruined, and then at the same time. They're facing this international isolation in the Gulf. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz. It did put a lot of pressure on global um, supply chain, but it really damaged your economic situation. It really exacerbated their economic collapse, but also it really isolated the Islamic Republic. It's not just about Iran and the US and Israel, it's also about Iran and its allies in the region, in China, in India, and they've been isolated even more than North Korea now. So I think they're also trying to bring in some of these guests from across different regions and signal this as to the regional partners that they're open to reestablish diplomatic relationship. They're open to be integrated in international community in a way that they were somehow before the war began. And here in the U.S., they really want to, as you mentioned, they want to signal this as survival, that they survived, therefore they won this conflict.
Is that what Iran wants Washington's main takeaway to be when I mean, you're based in DC? When Washington is looking at this funeral, that's the conclusion that Tehran wants it to reach, that we survived.
Absolutely, and you see that in messaging that you're hearing from Iranian regime officials, the remaining Iranian regime officials, such as Ghalibaf, the spokesperson of Iran's parliament. It is, the war was perceived internationally and here in the US as trying to achieve this goal that it wasn't really designed to achieve. And that was the toppling of the Islamic Republic. You can't really bring about a regime change with a campaign of airstrikes. You can remove missiles and drone facilities. You can degrade military capabilities. You can remove political leadership. You can damage the economy, but you can't really bring about a regime change. But unfortunately, or reality is that the campaign was perceived as trying to achieve a regime change. So by putting out this show, this burial ceremony for 1 week, I think the regime is trying to really project victory, and they survived. They're still in power. They're strong. They're still accepted by regional and international countries. So that's a message they want people to perceive or receive in DC and in Washington.
At the same time, though, how does Iran balance both mourning a leader killed in this war while pursuing a deal with the country it blames for killing him?
That's a really good question, and I think that's one of the skills, the very unique skills of this regime. Well, the reality is they do need to negotiate to get their economy out of the current situation. At the end of the day, they're not going to forget about where things were for this regime in January, when the collapse in Iranian currency value, and the inflation rate, which was about 40 to 50% before the war, probably at 70, 80% or higher right now. They don't forget they're going to have to go and try to govern and they need to get the economy back in a shape that they can take a day at a time, and they can go back to being able to pay salaries and export oil in volumes that would kind of help them with the inflation rate and import deficit that they have. So they do engage, and I know, and it's interesting, the messaging every time they come out of this round of talks, they message those talks as a sign of Iran's victory, that the Israeli and U.S. campaign was aimed at removing the regime. Now the U.S. and Israelis are open to engage in diplomatic engagement with Iran. So they're messaging those talks in a way that they still have some element of victory in them. But at the same time, you're right. I mean, internally they have this hypocrisy, or this problem that they have to address with their course hardline supporters, that they're engaging and negotiating with the same forces that killed their supreme leader.
Now, Miad, you've been talking about the various leaders that are in Tehran for this funeral. Let's have a look at those. Among them are Dmitry Medvedev, former president and prime minister of Russia, which is a key ally of Iran. Also there is Shehbaz Sharif, the prime minister of Pakistan, whose country has played a key role in mediating peace talks between the US and Iran. Around 30 nations are represented. Miad was talking about those, including India, China and Iran's neighbours in the Caucasus region. Delegations are also present from Iran's proxies in the Middle East, the Palestinian militant group Hamas, the Lebanese militia Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen. Miad, what is Donald Trump going to be thinking about all of these leaders and groups attending these events in Iran?
You know, at the moment, I think President Trump is very focused on the survival of this memorandum of understanding, which I would call the memorandum of misunderstanding, because there are different interpretations of the text of the MOU. And for that reason, it's been on shady grounds. And it's clear President Trump would like to keep memorandum of understanding in place. He wants to keep the Strait of Hormuz open and resupply of oil in different countries, including the US reserves. So I don't think President Trump is going to really focus on who attended. Secretary Rubio would be focused on this issue because he's a Secretary of State and he's involved on diplomatic engagements with different countries. But at this point, one is clear that Iran didn't receive high and senior level visits from major U.S. allies. But I think President Trump right now is more focused on keeping that memorandum of understanding in place, at least until after the midterm election here in the US.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. If we focus back on Iran now in this funeral, I'd like to ask you about Mojtaba Khamenei. He's yet to be seen. He has not appeared in public as Iran's new supreme leader. This funeral for his father is taking place. Could he appear in public over the coming days? What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's possible, but I would say it's unlikely. Just imagine if he does show up, and let's say he's still alive, and he does show up, and he gets targeted and killed by the Israelis. That'll be a major blow. That would be a major defeat or setback in Iran's current posture. So I think it's possible that we just don't see Mojtaba Khamenei anytime soon. He's been releasing audio tapes, and based on reports that we're seeing, that even regime officials at the highest level, they don't get to directly meet with him, and they're exchanging notes. So a lot of questions that whether he's still alive, but if he is, I think it's unlikely that he would show up anytime soon. We also seen reports that he is badly wounded, and he was badly wounded in the same strike that killed former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. So he could be just not in the health situation to be able to show up to this ceremony.
Okay. Beyond the funeral itself, what signals is Iran sending about continuity? Is the message that Khamenei is gone, but the system he built remains intact, given, I guess, that his son is the new supreme leader?
I think as again, for different audiences, is going to have different, it's going to be received differently. I think domestically, I think the regime understands that now there's a huge gap between the regime itself and the majority of Iranian population. That you can't deny that. But if you look back at January and the fact that the regime had to kill tens of thousands of Iranians in a matter of 2 or 3 days, shut down the internet for almost 2 months to prevent or avoid another round of protests. So regime understands that it's lost its legitimacy with the majority of the population, but also with its core supporters, that 10 to 15%, I would estimate, of its remaining supporters. It does want to show its ability to continue to govern and its ability to also engage diplomatically with the world and reach agreements and go back to commerce with allies and partners. So when it comes to the US and the West, I think the regime is just looking into dragging its feet with the talks, show some form of, as you said, survival and victory out of this situation, this war, and dragging its feet in negotiations, not fully give up its control over the Strait of Hormuz or its ability to slow down the flow of commerce through the Strait of Hormuz, and just wait out the Trump administration, get Iran out of the media attention in the West, and then go back to what it's done. This playbook of just taking a day at a time and negotiating and engaging with the West and managing pressure. Iranian regime never engages in negotiations to resolve issues. They engage in negotiations to just manage pressure, and that's where they're going to be, and that's where kind of they are right now.
It's been great speaking with you. Thanks so much. We've been speaking to Miad Maleki from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you make of the symbolism and spectacle from this funeral in Iran. Let us know in the comments. If you like this video, please hit the like button. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. I'm Jared Reid in Berlin. Thanks for watching.